Okay, good evening, everyone. Come on in. We're going to get comfortable here. We're going to spend just a few minutes, and then we're going to get started talking about CDC guidelines, everybody's favorite topic this time of year. What is going on at the CDC? So we're going to give it just about 60 seconds here as people make their way in, and we'll get started. As a quick reminder, if this is your first time joining us for After Hours, if you have any questions tonight, put it in the question and answer, the Q&A box, because that's what we keep an eye on. We're not keeping a close eye on the chat during all of this. If you would, just be sure to put them in the questions and answers, because that's what we're keeping an eye on over here, and that's a big help to us. We want to know exactly what's on your mind as we're going through all of this stuff. So this is really a two-part series that we're getting ready. Today we're going to be educating ourselves on the CDC guidelines. Next week we're going to be talking about how do we translate that into action? How can we start applying these into our band, into our orchestra classrooms to prepare for what might be this fall? I know there's a lot of questions, and we're kind of hypothesizing too, but what we can do is look at the information we have, the data that we have, and at least start structuring a template that we can start applying to our classrooms, to things that are going on. So we're going to go ahead and get started. It is 5:01. So it's going to be me tonight. We don't have a full panel, but I do have an outstanding person joining us. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Barry, how are you today?
I'm great. Hello, everybody. I'm Barry Troball. I'm Director of Bands at Munford High School, and I'm just so glad to be here tonight to share some information and answer some questions and just to see real human beings for a while.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thanks, Barry, for being here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, tonight, all about the CDC guidelines. Now, one of the things I do want to point out, I'm not a medical professional. I don't work for the CDC. We work here at Amro Music in Memphis. So what I've just done over the last couple of weeks, is just like many of you, is spent a lot of time just reading it. And what I wanted to do is address, there's about a dozen different documents, but there's three that I think we want to spend a little bit of extra time clarifying tonight, because I think they give us some great insight onto what might be for this fall. And so I really just want to focus on three CDC documents. Again, if you're interested in more, there's about a dozen as it relates to school on their website. But this is what we're going to be looking at tonight. The first is the Interim Guidance for Administrators of K-12 Schools and Child Care Programs. That's the first one. The second one is Considerations for Youth and Summer Camps. Now, although this document never does directly mention band, music, orchestra, I know a lot of programs have summer camps, band camps, blast-off camps, things like that. So I think this document gives us some great insight onto what a summer camp might look like and help us clarify. And then the third is the one that came out last week. It was buried on page 45 of the CDC Activities and Initiatives Supporting the COVID-19 Response and the President's Plan for Opening America Up Again. So again, if you're watching a recording or if you're at home and want to reference these documents, I'm going to be sending out this PowerPoint. These are all hyperlinks right here. And so you can just open the PowerPoint and jump right into the document so you can read what these presentations are referencing. Now, there's a couple of other helpful sources that Barry and I are going to talk about that I do want to spend some time on as well. NAM and NAFME have some great instrument cleaning guidelines. The Education Commission of the States got some great information. And then also the Colorado State University Research Project. We're going to talk about those tonight at the end after the CDC. But all three of these, I think educators need to be familiar with and following them closely as well. So we're going to dive in a little bit to these. Now, before we get going, I think we have to talk a little bit about assumptions, because I think people need to understand and recognize where we're coming from, because I think it helps you better understand where we're going with this directly. And so, Barry, I'm going to lean on you a little bit, and because you and I talked through some assumptions today. So the first assumption is decisions will be made locally. Why do you think that is, or what do you have to indicate that to be the case?
Well, if you are watching the news at all and then listening to maybe your administrators at school and local politicians and whatnot, it seems like it's not going to be a top-down mandate. They're simply going to set a bunch of protocols in place, but at the final decision where the boots meet the ground, so to speak, it's going to be made at the local level. And in the large picture, Nick, that's a really good thing, because that allows schools to have a little bit of dexterity to to manipulate things to work for them safely and effectively, not only for us music teachers, but just for academics in general, school in general. So it's going to be made locally, but that too has some really strong conflicts to it, because it's going to, obviously, in certain areas of the country, they might be in a more strenuous guideline, a protocol, whereas other areas might be quite lax. So it's a double-edged sword to some extent, but it's most certainly going to be made locally. I'm spending a great deal of time with my building principal right now, several times each day, and we just talk about the latest trends and what's going on. I'm trying to help her to make a great decision about my program.
Yeah. I think you're right. The good news is that a proactive educator can be a part of the conversation. The bad news is I think it's going to require a lot of proactive problem solving.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to the next point in this, and that is problem solving will be greater than problem sharing. And what I mean by problem sharing is just expressing to others all of the problems that we have right now. And Barry, why is this going to be so important right now?
Well, simply put, the easiest decision your administrator can make, given the horrible situation that they face right now with all the different things going on, the very easiest answer that they can give you to all of your problems is no. They can simply just say, you know, it's too complex, it's too overwhelming, there's too many moving parts, so we're just going to scale your program back to this. We'll call that Plan Z. Obviously, we're aiming for Plan A. So you just have to remember that these administrators are faced with some awful tough decisions, not only for band, choir, all athletics, anything that gathers at school, honestly. So we need to be focused and help our, as I mentioned before, help our administrators to have all of the data that they possibly can have, and not only have the data, but understand our passion for what we want to do. We love kids, and we love teaching music, and we love hearing these students, these young adults, make music. So we're going to be doing that to some extent, there's no doubt, but we've got to solve these problems. And if you just simply go into your administrator's office and tell him or her that, you know, this, and you go down your laundry list of things that are troubling you or you're apprehensive about, just please remember that you're better off going in with some resolves instead of just problems. And I hope we continue to talk about that today, because that's really where we are. We're all about being proactive. If we're proactive, we're going to be great.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, I think you just touched on the third part so well. Problem sharing increases the risk of cuts, because to your point, the easiest thing an administrator can say is no. Now, the good news is I think we have an extremely collaborative community of music educators within our region and our area and nationally. So these conversations are taking place, and that's really what tonight is about. So I don't want people to feel overwhelmed. There will be support, but we have to be proactive in identifying the issues within our building, our classroom, and then working towards solving those together. So those are the assumptions that we're coming from today. So what I want to do now is go ahead and dive in and talk about our first document, our first CDC guideline, and that's the guidance for administrators. I think this one is really interesting because it provides some insight as to what your administrators might be thinking through right now. And there's some key words in here that I think if you start hearing your administrator say these key words, could indicate that this is the document that they're kind of using as their guiding principles. So this particular guidance, again, for K-12 administrators from the CDC, what it really focuses on is breaking up into 3 primary mitigation strategies as it relates to the spread of coronavirus. And it creates action items and guidelines based on those 3 mitigation strategies. So the 3 mitigation strategies is that there's no community spread, and they call that the preparedness phase. The second is minimal to moderate community spread, and then substantial community spread. And it offers some guidelines on how to address each of these. Now, one of the things that this document does say is that the decisions, to Barry's point, need to be made locally with the local health officials. So it's very possible that schools across county lines, state lines, might be in different mitigation strategies. So I think it's helpful to be familiar with all of them. So here's the first one, the first phase, which they call the preparedness phase, no community spread. So the emphasis in this particular phase is on proactive planning. How are we going to handle the potential for an outbreak in our community? It's a lot of proactive management, things like hygiene, reinforcing healthy hygiene, intensifying the cleaning and disinfection efforts. I think we're going to have to see a very structured plan for disinfecting our classrooms and everything like that. Monitoring and planning for absenteeism. And then just assessing group gatherings. At this particular stage, the CDC does not say cancel all group gatherings. It didn't give those. It just simply says assess your group gatherings. So Barry, as it relates to the preparedness phase, particularly group gatherings, what are you kind of thinking about? And are there any events that you're thinking, you know, if we're in the preparedness phase, maybe this isn't as necessary as I'd like for it to be, or not something we need to do in this particular phase?
Well, obviously the gathering restrictions seem to be what gets the most time on the news and in conversations for most people. And obviously, as you've said, it's based on the locale and what's going on. And for us, we just need to be very, very proactive and begin our planning. Not necessarily begin our planning. We need to make sure our planning is moving every day toward what we want. If you know me well, I don't think this will surprise you, but I call myself that I'm pessimistically optimistic. I am an optimist, but I view it through the lens of a pessimist. And for me, I've looked at this, and obviously plan A, what I would like to have, my optimistic, was all of my kids on campus. We do things just as we always have. It's been fun. It's been successful. I would love to do it again. But the pessimist in me says, okay, well, there's a strong chance that we're not. So what I try to find is the worst case scenario. For us in this particular concern here is that we might be in groups of 10. For band camp, who knows, we may be even in instructional groups of say 15 or 20 in our classrooms. So me personally, I am putting a part of me that is not going to necessarily think 24/7 of being a band director, a large ensemble director, whether they're sit-down ensembles or marching arts ensembles. I'm going to keep the idea very open and work toward that plan of maybe being a chamber coach. Maybe that's what we're going to see this year. We're going to see small groups of students instead of our large groups. That's okay. We're still going to be with our kids. We're going to be with our favorite people on the planet, and we're going to be doing our very favorite thing, which is make music together. So me, to answer your question very specifically, Nick, I'm looking at the A to Z again, and obviously I want A, but Z could be quite small groups. And again, as we evolve, as this living survey that we're going through here, as it does kind of take on its own and the smoke clears, we're going to find out what size groups we can be in. And that's not decided yet. And I'm not sure it's going to be decided in the next 30, 45 days. I think this is an ongoing survey or experiment. I hate to call it an experiment, but we're just kind of just seeing what's going on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think you bring up a good point. You know, as it relates to these, particularly this document where we've got 3 different phases, kind of having an A plan, a B plan, and a C plan, and this document gives some good ones. So in this one, again, it's just assess group gatherings. Now, the second is minimal, what they consider minimal to moderate community transmission. And again, it's up to the local health officials and the LEAs, the local education authorities, to kind of determine the various phases in this. And this is where they begin to introduce multiple social distancing strategies. So in this the minimal to moderate community spread, we start to see recommendations to cancel things like field trips, to modify classes, to encourage teacher rather than student movement, increase space. This document doesn't say how much, but we're going to get to that in another document. And then staggering arrival times and limiting cross school transfers for maybe after school or special programs. So this is where we start to see some of the principles of social distancing introduced, and we can kind of get an idea, depending on the severity of our community, what extent we might be asked to social distance within our classroom. And then the third is what they call substantial community spread, which again is up to the CDC, the local officials, according to the CDC. But in this case, they come out and say, consider extended school dismissals in collaboration with local health officials. So, you know, this is the case where when we get to the point somebody says substantial, we should probably begin to connect the dots with perhaps some extended school closures for a 2-week period of time. So one of the other things that this document addresses is what to do if a confirmed person enters the building. In this particular document, the guidance for administrators say that there should be a short but immediate, and they recommend 2 to 5 day building dismissal to clean and disinfect as well as to contact trace. And again, they recommend during school dismissals that you should also cancel extracurricular group activities, school-based after-school programs, large events. Also, we can clean and disinfect thoroughly. So, Barry, I think one of the assumptions here as educators is that we've got to be planned that we could see some sporadic with very, very short notification periods that the building is closed down. How are you planning or thinking through that from an educator's perspective?
Well, I think we all learned a huge and valuable lesson when on March the 13th for my particular school district, we left school fully anticipating on coming back Monday, and did we no more than get home, and we were then notified that school was out indefinitely. I think they were saying a 2-week period. So I think we've all learned a lesson that what is active for this moment may not be active in the next moment to come. So again, I think you have to be very open-minded, very diversified. I think that all of our, I hate to talk about lesson plans because everybody just rolled their eyes, me included, but I think we need to have in our grand sense of lesson plans, I think we need to accept the fact that we may have students absent, whether it's over conservative parents that don't want their child to go if there's a rumor or whatever, illness for sure. And again, these local districts are going to have to make one decision that is for the good of everybody in their school or school district. And that's a tough call. So me, I'm trying to be not as singularly focused as I always am on what the next outing is for my group. If it's band camp, then I'm concerned about those weeks of band camp, and then that transitions over to getting into school and then eventually football games and marching contests and those. I'm going to have an approach that we're going to move in the direction that we can go closest to plan A, and that we will accept these slight breaks if we happen to have them. I will already have in place a number of electronic means of transferring data to my kids. I don't know how successful I did not reach a lot of success with initially having much input from my students as we took that break in March, but we're all smarter from that. We've learned what doesn't work, but I'll have some things in place that we can basically just change over from a face-to-face type of instructional model over to a more virtual arena if we have to. And if we end up staying a number of weeks, you're going to have to continue to work hard to maintain that stockpile of worthy and useful tools and exercises for our students to stay active. What we want is music to be in the lives of our children. And how we do it is not really the big concern, other than we need to be very, very eclectic about our different approaches and what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point, Barry. And I think just, again, none of us have the concrete answers right now, but just thinking through this stuff is going to be so important of, hey, what am I going to do if a student in my program tests positive, which is
I've already asked that question to my principal. We started football today, and she and I had the conversation of what impact will it have on me if there's a football student that takes the virus, and she did not have an answer, just as you said, Nick. But it is great dialogue. And you know, if I can take a second here, if there's one thing that we all should be doing, and I challenge each and every one of you, if you don't have a really strong and friendly communication line and trust line friendship with your building administrator, now is when you need to get that. You have plenty to talk about. You have plenty in common. You need to build that bridge so you can openly speak to your administrator so he or she understands your passion, but you also understand their dilemma as well. And I want to say, if you don't have a good rapport with your head football coach, right now, today, pick up the phone, call him, and let's all get on the same page, because I am thoroughly convinced that as football at Munford High School progresses forward, the lessons learned from football will be the guidelines that are instilled on my program as we start here in a few weeks. So communication, trust, and just that open air of dialogue is so important, Nick, at this point. We cannot do this separately. We cannot do this separately, but we have such a strong force together, and we have so many resources that we can use outside of our immediate group.
Yeah, those are both great points. The importance of the two really key relationships right now.
Absolutely.
For us to manage. So yeah, again, just one of the thought exploration activities is, hey, what if a student tests positive in my program? How am I going to handle that? And then certainly I think the CDC has pretty direct guidelines for what if somebody just walks in the building, either a student outside your program, a visitor, a vendor, whoever it might be, and how to handle that within the school. So to your point, having a plan where we can just switch the light switch and say, okay, we're going to digital, I've got content ready, and we're going to rock and roll, is probably a very helpful activity and exercise to be planning for. So that's the guidance for administrators documents. Again, kind of lays out 3 different phases: a preparedness, minimal to moderate, and a substantial phase of spread within the community. I think this is a wonderful document for everybody to read. We've got a link to it. It's pretty short. It's only about 10 pages compared to some of the other CDC guidelines, and it's probably one of the easier ones to follow, in my opinion. So I think this is a great document because it gives some insight on what your administrators might be thinking about right now, and allows you to align your efforts with your administrator. So here's the next one I want to talk about, is the youth and summer camps. Now, again, this one doesn't directly mention music, band, orchestra, anything like that. But I think this document is setting the tone for other activities through the summer. And if some people have summer programs, blast-off camps, band camps, this document gives some great insight onto how we should manage that. Now, there's a couple of quotes that I want to really highlight here. Really, with the CDC, everything they're saying is that these are guidelines, these are suggestions, make them locally. So the phrase in this document was, implementation should be guided by what is feasible, practical, acceptable, and tailored to meet the needs of each community. I really like that phrase, and I think it allows us to kind of adapt based on buildings. I mean, Barry, you were talking about, you teach at a middle school and high school, and how different things are right now between the 2 buildings.
Yeah, our 2 campuses, our middle school campus and our high school campus, are almost at opposite ends of the spectrum here. Our middle school is quite open. We're doing some summer camps with students and such, but yet my high school environment is much more reserved. We do, like I said, we have started football. We'll start some band activities here very soon, cheerleading, volleyball, those things, but we're under some strict mandates of screening, testing, record keeping. So yeah, we mentioned from state to state, district to district, but in my case, it's literally a school that they can be connected with a 6-iron, so they're not far apart.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the implementation could be very different. There's a good thing: proactive directors can get involved in these conversations. So the other thing it says is, again, considerations are meant to supplement, not replace, local rules and regulations. So I think that's important. Now, one of the things that the youth and summer camps, and really the guidelines for schools that are currently open, is they don't really encourage these things not to take place, but it really focuses on risk management strategies as it relates to the spread of coronavirus. So, it says, these are the things that are lower risk. These are the things that are higher risk. Do more lower risk and not more higher risk activities. And that's really what this document dives into. So let's talk about what some of these things look at. So the first is it says the lowest risk activities that you can do are in small groups where the students or the participants stay together. They're from the same geographic location. They remain socially distanced, 6 feet apart. They do not share any objects, and they do activities outside. That's the lowest risk activity that we can do. Now we can go to the next level of risk by mixing the groups, but we remain 6 feet apart, outdoor activities, same geographic area, no shared objects. Now, even more risk is we start mixing the groups. We're not spaced apart, but we stay with students from the same geographic area. And then our highest risk is we mix the groups, we're not socially distanced, and we are from different geographic areas. Now, this is interesting, Barry, because I think the more recent documents, and this one in particular, places a very strong emphasis on students not from the same geographic area and the risk of community spread from one community to the next and what that poses. And that kind of comes out in this document, where the highest risk is actually people from different geographic area, not necessarily students that are close together but from the same geographic area. What does that mean from your perspective?
Well, I can give you, we're already working that. Our mandate here for my high school group is that we're going to be in groups of 10 or less, and that includes the instructor. And a group will be set and will have to be maintained. We can't take a kid out of this group and put them in another group. The groups must stay as a whole. And the groups themselves, if we have them outside, we can have more than one group of 10, but the groups have to be widely spaced. And, you know, toward your answer here, I think that's a safe move. Now, it's a little bit archaic for us to get what we perceive, again, as our end result work accomplished. But again, it's not insurmountable. We're just going to have to understand that health-wise, we have to put the health of our children and ourselves and our colleagues first. I mean, health is the paramount thing here. So we're just going to have to basically swallow the fact that at my school, that my principal is requiring us to be in tents. And looking at this list right here of things that choices we have, I guess, if we're just focused on this particular model, I don't think any of us want to do the high risk category because we see how ill-fated that is. Back to our earlier conversation about children getting sick while they're in our activity or another activity. Obviously, you want to move up mentally. You want to try to move up to as high as you can and still accomplish the things that you're trying to do with your children in the activity that you've chosen. So I like this list a lot. I find it very limiting, as Nick, as you and I talked about some time ago about this. But nonetheless, this is a smart play if we want our children's parents, the parents that we serve, if we want them to truly trust us, we have to put these children's health first. And we have to be benevolent to the fact that what we do could increase the likelihood that these students would become ill with the COVID virus. So as much as I would love to go on this lowest risk and just kind of have the wide open, I don't like the highest risk either, because that we just have to mitigate ourselves here to be benevolent to our needs, both health-wise and emotional. And we'll come back to the emotional part, but we've got to do what we do, but we've got to be safe about it. This is not a bad set of requirements here, as long as it is based at the very local level.
Yeah. Yeah, and so again, we don't see anything dramatic, like no camps, nobody getting together. I think the point of this document is just try to minimize the risk the best of your ability, and always look at every activity and say, how can I go down to that next lowest risk? And that's
right.
really, I think, the purpose of this document, and it provides some great insight that we can do. Now, again, we start to see this promoting behaviors to reduce spread. The more recent documents, I'm seeing this in all of it, and I think we're going to see this throughout the CDC. This one does introduce the cloth face coverings, and we're going to talk about that in the next document, but ensuring that you have adequate cleaning supplies, cleaning and disinfecting supplies, proactively avoiding shared objects, proper ventilation, modified layouts. Barry, we talked about cohorting and keeping students kind of in an assigned cohort together, hand hygiene. So to your point, the good news is that all of these we can address proactively within our classroom. We can make plans. And I added hydration. That's not in the CDC guidelines, but you mentioned that, Barry, because
yes,
summer activities require hydration. and some of the things that you were thinking through. How am I going to get around that? So you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, we run a 3-week-long band camp, and we work 7 hours a day. We work 2 3.5-hour sessions. It's kind of like 2-a-days if you're a sports person. But one of our key and vital things to keep our students going, besides the teaching that we do on how to rest and how to eat, is our hydration program. And I have an army of people that provide Gatorade, water, those types of things in the large 5-gallon, I believe they are, containers. We get a plethora of paper cups, and a student goes into the line, gets themselves a cup, and then they start filling up whatever they're going to do. That has worked really well for us, but that's not going to fly with the shared items mandate that we have. So obviously I'm going to have to look into probably bottled water, which is not that big a deal, a little bit more, a lot more expensive, but nonetheless. And then for the sports drinks, those that do utilize those, we're going to have to look at self-contained volumes of those. But the day, at least for the year, I would say the day of the going to the hydration station and doing it the way we normally do it, it's just not going to happen. And I don't like it, but again, it's just part of the deal, and we'll overcome this. That's not a big challenge at all. It's just a redirect.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So again, this document just gives some great clarity if you're thinking about a summer program on evaluating and a lens to go through. Now, as we're talking about summer programs, Barry, I do want to talk about this. This document does not address it. Some of the other documents do, but I think we need to talk about it while we're talking about summer programs, and that's required events. You know, the CDC comes out a couple of times and says, you really need to be flexible with people, and a lot of school guidelines are starting to say parents and students have the right to choose what's required and what's not. How does that go into your thinking as it relates to summer camps?
Well, you know, it goes back to really what I'm all about. We all stayed in our band programs because it had some emotional tie to us. It wasn't necessarily music that kept us in the first couple of years. It was the relationships and the friendships and the camaraderie. I call it family. When I use the word family in the next few sentences, that's what I'm speaking to. And I think the students today are no different. Your students are good. If they are band kids or whatever you call them, they're going to come and they're going to be passionate about it, because this is why they go to school. This is why these students go to school. I was one of those kids. I seemed to have band the last period of my school day through my grade school years. And all I knew was that I had to get through the day so I could go down to the band room and do what I love to do so much. And kids are no different today. So understand that they're going to be passionate about being there. But at the same time, especially early on, Nick, before these incoming kids, the first year kids in your high school program, their parents are going to be a little reluctant. They may be a little reluctant. So the real rule of thumb here is let's rely on the fact that our kids are passionate about what we do, what they do, doing it together, the family. I call it the Munford Band family. I hope you do as well. Call yours the band family. They're passionate about the band family. But we're going to have to redirect our emotions to not become upset or anything if a student misses a day or 2 or 3. We're just in a different world here. As much as I want my students, every one of them, to be there, I'm usually the one that's complaining because we got one kid out of over 200 students, and I'm concerned about the one kid that didn't show up. We've got to build that trust factor from our community. Our community has to feel comfortable that I am making the best decisions for the students of the Munford High School Band, and that I'm weighing all of the challenges and all of my options. So I don't want to come out and say that these are optional rehearsals, because we all know that they're not. But at the same time, I think we need to have the approach of what our priorities actually are.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. So that's something that this is a big mental shift, particularly from people that come from a competitive background and have high expectations going into each season. And so that's something that we're going to have to just kind of mentally grapple with and make plans for moving forward. But
I do want to add one thing. Just before I got on the webinar, I got a response from my school. Our school board's formula, if you will, their directive on how we're going to sanitize. And because I've got to fill in all of my check boxes to get my kids on campus, and finally got what the approved cleaning and disinfecting material, and it turns out to be as simple as a bleach and water combination. So, but these are things that I'm very adamant about. I want to know what my responsibilities are of record keeping of my students as I test their temperature and ask them the COVID survey questions. And I want to know how I'm supposed to disinfect all the items that they touch and they play and all that kind of stuff. So again, this list right here is a pretty good checklist in itself, because it does cover so many different things. And I want to encourage everybody to overthink these so that you don't have to think on the fly as your kids are all there, and then you don't know how to do some or one of these. They need to be addressed in your planning thoughts soon. And if you're having trouble with this, which I was as well, and what did I do? I reached out to people that have a better vision of this. I'm gonna make my email available to everybody, and I welcome correspondence with you. I hope to learn something from you, but if you have a question that you just come to a dead end on one of these or anything that we talk about today, please feel free to contact me. And I'm sure Nick is the same way. I know Amro has been there for me countless times when I needed some guidance. So we're going to do this together.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, all right. So that kind of wraps up the guidance for youth and summer camps. So again, this document is really just about risk mitigation and minimizing the potential for spread, not really canning and canceling things. So if you're planning on a summer program or just want some more guidance, I'd really recommend approaching this document, because it really is a good one.
Nick,
Right,
you mentioned before that the CDC was only 10 pages. To be honest with you, as I look at this on your screen here, this is a super condensed version of the entire CDC report.
Yeah.
This has almost every component in there. And so if they just started with this, I think it'd be a great head start.
Yeah, it's a great document to reference. Now, this is the third and final document I want to talk about. This is the interim guidance for schools that was buried on page 45 of the CDC activities and initiatives supporting the COVID-19 response and the president's plan for opening America up again. So always love their short and concise titles that they use in government documents, but that's okay. So again, these are all about, again, the same reference we saw. All decisions about following these recommendations should be made in collaboration with local health officials and other state and local authorities who can assess the current level of mitigation. So again, we see that recommendation again, these decisions need to be made locally. Now in this one, you know, in the first document for administrators, we talked about phases. We had 3 different phases: preparedness, minimal to moderate, and substantial spread. This one we introduce steps. We don't use phases. Now, I will be the first to admit reading these two documents side by side is a little confusing, and at times they give a little bit different information. I won't say they contradict each other, but I will say that they were probably written by different teams at the CDC because the terminology and the verbiage that they use is different. And I think that's important because these documents are different. We can use some of the terminology to identify which documents our administrators might be using. So if you hear your administrator talking about steps, they're probably referencing this particular document. If you hear them talking about phases, they're probably referencing the other document that we covered first for administrators. And I think that's important, again, because it gives us insights onto what parameters they're going to be expecting of us.
You know, Nick, to jump in right here,
yeah.
The vernacular of this is written a lot more harshly. You're exactly correct. It's not a great deal different from the administrator document, but this one is much harsher. And to be honest, if you believe in your conversations that you're having, hopefully every day with your local school administrator, if they use these words as steps, if you hear the word steps, the hair should go up a little bit on the back of your neck, because this one, I think, Nick, is a little easier for an administrator to bail on these problematic, difficult to solve situations. I really do. I don't think it was intended to be that way, and maybe I'm just overthinking it, to be honest. But this one, I know you'll agree with me, Nick, that this one is just a little bit more dictatorial I called it, when you and I were talking, I said, this is a lot like reading the 10 Commandments. It's right there,
It is a little bit more direct. So let's dive in, and then we'll talk a little bit more about this document in particular. This was the one, again, this one was released last week. I suspect some of you saw an infographic that went up on Facebook that kind of caused a little bit of a stink. So this is the document. Yeah, this was the document that kind of made its rounds. So we're going to spend some time addressing this particular document. Okay, so again, the phrases that we hear that are unique to this document: scaling up in steps. These are the two phrases that this document really references. So it says scaling up your school operations should be done in 3 steps. The first step is if your school is already closed, remain closed. Do online learning, do e-learning. That one's pretty simple to follow. Step 2, if your school opens and moves to step 2, you should have what they called enhanced social distancing and be limited to students only in your local geographic area. And then step 3 is that they don't use the word enhanced, just social distancing measures. And then here again, we see these geographic silos. We should restrict attendance to those students and administrators, faculty, only from other step 3 areas. So we see more of this geographic siloing take place in this particular document that gets referenced. So let's pull apart some of these steps. So in all of the steps, they talk about, again, promoting healthy hygiene practices. We talked about that in the last document. Here it is again: intensifying cleaning and disinfecting, and then limit the sharing, which is something I think we'll have to talk a little bit more about. And then we get some more clarity on face masks. This was the document that I first ran across that started to provide some actual recommendations as it relates to face masks. So this is the actual verbiage: teach and reinforce use of face coverings among all staff. Face coverings may be challenging for students to wear in all-day settings. Face coverings should be worn by staff and encouraged in students, particularly older students, if feasible, and are most essential in times when physical distancing is difficult. So I think this paragraph really starts to give us some guidelines as to what we should expect of face masks this fall. When social distancing is difficult, it highly encouraged for older students and really worn by staff is kind of the things that I'm taking away. Barry, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this one scares me. And to our point from earlier, an administrator reads this really quickly, and the easiest response from him or her is just to say, okay, we're not going to put 75 kids in a band room together. Yeah. Obviously, we can't have masks on and play trumpet. So I think the intent was pretty good here, but this one, quite honestly, Nick, scares me. I think this is a little bit too dictatorial. I used that word a minute ago, but that's exactly what it is. It's basically, this is kind of an all or nothing approach in my mind. And again, I may be overthinking it, but this one, I'm not warm and fuzzy over this.
Well, so what are some of the proactive things that we can be doing now? I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, it says when social distancing is difficult, or physical distancing is difficult. So I'm just going to have outdoor rehearsals. And that's the first thing that comes to mind is if it's a pretty day and I can't social distance, we're going outside. And if it rains, we're going to do something else inside. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind. What are your thoughts?
Earlier this afternoon at 2 o'clock, I was on the College Band Director Association webinar, and it was quite informative with the things that they were talking about. They're addressing the exact same things that we're talking about here tonight. And one of the college directors, and I can't remember where she was from, but they were talking about this particular challenge here. How are we going to meet the guidelines and all? And she said, I'm fortunate enough to have a courtyard outside my band room. And she says, well, every day that we possibly can, we're going to, it was a sit-down ensemble. We're going to have wind ensemble rehearsal outdoors. We're going to open up this. I'm sure many of them are listening or are familiar with this, the study that's going on from Colorado and all this other stuff on the aerosol studies that they're doing. This solves a lot of that. We don't have to worry about ventilation. We can, I know it's not the best of settings, but we can separate. There's no rule that says that we have to sit elbow to elbow in our sit-down ensemble. So the outdoor thing, yes, If that's something that you can utilize, go for it. I'm planning on that being a large part of my marching band preparation, whatever we choose to prepare for, is that we're going to be outside every minute that we can. We may just be working on music. We may take chairs out to the field, but we're going to be outside, which just absolutely takes part of this challenge off the table.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So even this, I don't think is an insurmountable challenge. If we're proactive and we're communicating with the people we need to communicate, we can figure this one out too.
But this one, we have to be open not to demand plan A, because this one will work just as you're saying, but we can't be just having our feet stuck in the sand that no, we're gonna sit down and we're gonna do our normal. I'm gonna put 140 kids in the band room. You know, we've got to be a little bit more benevolent to the real needs here.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I do have a question from somebody that says face shields. Now, none of the documents that I have read has actually referenced a face shield. Everything that I have read have been the cotton masks. Have you seen anything different, Barry?
That was a topic again in the college band director thing today, and it didn't last long. I think that's probably, though that's a conversation point today, I think financially that's just feasible. And then there's just, that brings up that's another rabbit hole to jump down, but I really have not heard anything. Obviously, we're going to see ourselves phase away from the paper product face masks, even the N95s, and we're going to be able to do the cloth ones and reuse them after we sanitize them correctly. So I really don't think that's a player.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, just the documents that I have read, nothing that I have seen indicates face shields over.
Well, they even talked today about the use of wearing surgical gloves, which initially sounds pretty good, especially for percussionists, so that they literally they can play more than one instrument and they're not making skin contact. But then it was brought up accurately so that a large part of the effectiveness of surgical gloves is learning how to wear them and what you can do and can't do, putting them on, taking them off, and then when you have them on, the first time you touch your face or whatever, you've absolutely negated the. So there's a lot of things here that we can what if on, but I think these mainstream things are where we're headed. That's what I believe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So again, this presents its own unique set of challenges. What am I going to do if it's too hot? What am I going to do if it's raining? What am I going to do if the football team needs to use the space too? So there's a lot of things that, again, I think we have to be proactive about, but this is not insurmountable, and that we can talk about, that we can unpack further. So anyway, well, let's keep going. We have talked about, again, all steps. This is what they require, or guidelines, excuse me. I won't use the word require, all steps, interim guidance for schools. So again, now I do want to talk about social distancing, because they start to introduce different levels of social distancing through the various steps. And again, they use the word enhanced, and then they remove the word enhanced from social distancing. So the first thing is in step 1, cancel all field trips, group activities, and extracurricular activities. So first off, let's remember that step 1 is the school is doing e-learning right now. So this is probably already taking place naturally. So this really is not as dramatic as I've seen. Now, Barry, excuse me real quick. I have to step on a soapbox on this because of the term extracurricular activities. I just want to remind everybody that when the ESSA law, Every Student Succeeds Act, passed, band and music and the arts were listed as part of a well-rounded education, just like other subjects. There are no longer core subjects. So anybody that refers to band or music or the fine arts as an extracurricular activity is using the wrong term. And right now, I think it's really important that we kind of defend that terminology. Band and music and the arts are not extracurricular. The law says that this is a part of a well-rounded education, and we should stick to our guns on that one, in my opinion, so that we do not get lumped into the extracurricular activities that may be canceled. This is part of a well-rounded education. So just had to step onto my soapbox here, because I think that terminology is so important right now, and we should defend it very, very staunchly as we go forward. So I'm going to step off my soapbox here again. Step 1, canceling, but everything's already closed anyway, so I don't think that's a real shock. Now, step 1 and step 2 we start to see some of these social distancing. Ensure the students are static as possible. Restrict non-essential visitors. Limit our gathering. This is where we start to see 6 feet. Desks should be at least 6 feet apart. Closing communal spaces and staggering drop-off times. So again, these are all things that we've kind of seen conversations taking place about. So Barry, I mean, what are your thoughts on this as you kind of read through this list?
This is really a smoky part of that CDC report that this is drawn from. They're deep into that CDC report. In it somewhere, it actually says 1 student per 9 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, again, we've got to put our students' health at the top and our health at the top. But, I don't like this. I'm just going to put that out there. I don't like being limited by any of this. But this is not insurmountable for us at all, Nick. I'll figure out, if they will give me my kids and let me work with them, I'll figure out how to meet their 6-foot thing, and I'll do it healthily and wholesomely.
Yeah.
It's just another deal, and we can sit here and complain about it all day long, but I'd rather spend my time working out a resolve for it. I know it's here. I'm ready to jump on it and take care of it. And the 6 feet doesn't really scare me. Now, that's going to limit traditional marching band as we know it. I will go ahead and say that. That's going to be a real challenge to that. And if they don't make a concession to that, then we're going to have to rethink what we do. But if this is where we're headed, I'm not afraid of it. I'm just going to adapt to it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the 9 square feet thing makes sense, because if everybody kind of has this box 3 feet in either direction that nobody can enter and exit out of. So, we can use some geometry and actually take some measurements of our classroom and start to say, okay, this is the maximum number of students, if I'm asked to social distance, that I can do. So anyway, we'll address that as more guidelines and more information come out, but it's something that I think we should kind of keep in the back of our head and start running that plan. Okay, if I'm asked to social distance, this is the maximum number of people I can host in this classroom, and this is how I'm going to have to adjust and accommodate for that if I need to.
It's real and it's here. If you turn on the news, we have limitations on public gatherings, so it's going to be more pronounced in our school campus.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, the distance, the difference that I picked up. So again, these are step 1 and step 2 guidelines. These are the enhanced social distancing. The only thing that I saw different when we entered step 3 was we started to use some softer language. Mm-hmm. We started to see the words consider or allow minimal or if possible, but we still see the emphasis on restricting the mixing of people from different areas that are in previous steps. So if one school is in a step 3, if they're at step 3, not having students from steps 1 and 2 schools commingling and interacting. So that was really the big difference that I saw between steps 1 and 2, the enhanced, and then step 3. We start to see some softer language there.
In step 3, Nick, this is where all of us being creative, this is where we can really exist. We can make step 3, we can make work. It's just a matter of communicating with our people that we answer to, our administrators and our community, but we can make this work if we can get them to step 3. And getting to step 3 may largely be our responsibility to make sure that early on we're in step 1 and step 2 if we follow this model, and that we stay diligent about that and keep our kids safe. And as this does calm down a bit and we're allowed to go to step 3, then maybe we get to change our distance from one another and our numbers of people we get in a group. It's all a compound positive here, if you ask me.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I hate to use the phrase, we're all in this together, because I feel like I've heard it about 10,000 times now, but there's some truth in it that we have to be cognizant of. Yes. Now, one of the things that I have not found in this document, and if anybody that's listening has encountered this, please share it with me. I have not seen any actual criteria to progress from one step to the next. I know we're in Memphis and we have very clear phases right now to move through economically and what we have to do to get there. It's very transparent. I have not seen that. Maybe it's coming. Maybe it's going to be determined by the local officials. So if anybody has that information, I would be curious, because I do not know what the progression pattern looks like. It was not in this document, and I have not seen it in any other document. So if you're wondering, well, what do I have to do to get from step 1 to step 2 to step 3? I haven't seen that information yet, and would welcome anybody.
If I can add something there, I think what we do to ensure that there is a normal path for this, again, I think it's our communication with our administration and just showing them what we're doing proactively and reactively that is working. And I won't say convince them, but in essence, that's where we are, that we're doing the right things. Things are working out well. Let's relax this. Let's change this. So I think we're paramount here in being the actual transition between steps. That's how I view it for my program.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, all right, so this document does address closing again, what to do if somebody comes in the building and has tested positive for COVID. This document only recommends closing for 1 to 2 days. The other document for administrators referenced 2 to 5. So again, we've got kind of this wide thing, but I think the key takeaway here, Barry, is that if somebody walks through the building, that's 2 documents now that we've said, shut it down and disinfect. So we should prepare for that.
We've got to be prepared for it. And I really think that there's no real difference between these two. I think they're addressing things a little differently. I think this particular closure clause is more on the line of just sending in the cleaning crew to take school out for a day or two, clean the school very, very well, and then get the kids back in. I think the other one is probably more geared to if we do have a student that might have infected another, or a teacher that might have infected, and they're trying to give it up to 5 days to either fully show itself or to prove that it's not there. I think that they're kind of the same thing, if you understand where I'm going with this. They're just different approaches. I think this one is just simply in the word, it says disinfection.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you can just be thinking through and anticipating, statistically speaking, you could have somebody walk through. How are you going to handle that with your students?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's going to happen. It is going to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, okay, there's a couple of other resources. We're not going to go in depth like we have the last 3 documents, but I think everybody needs to know. These are not hyperlinks. I'm going to go through and turn these into hyperlinks before I share them with everybody. The first is the NAM and NAFME COVID-19 Instrument Disinfecting Guidelines. Really great document where they go by instrument, different products that you can use, when you should use alcohol, when you should not use alcohol, things like that. Really helpful. So as you're thinking through, how am I going to keep my classroom disinfected? This would be the first place that I would turn to start to collect some of that information. The next one I'd point out is it's called the Education Commission of the States. They've got a really great document out that they update regularly that takes a very global approach to the things that are going on in the education world. So they'll say in Tennessee, this is something that's going on from a financial standpoint, from a classroom standpoint. And I have found that you can use the search and find feature to quickly find bullet points that relate to your local area. And they're doing a great job monitoring movement with state legislation, and then at state Department of Education level. So this is a great place. So I'll reference to that document because I think it's a good global perspective. The other reason I like this one is that I can kind of see and monitor what's going on in other states outside my area and seeing how they're responding to it. You know, for example, the Nevada Department of Education, I've got it on my desk, has their path forward plan responding to COVID-19. I don't live in Nevada, but this could be a great resource and insight onto how Tennessee or Arkansas or Mississippi might respond to it. So I like flipping through these.
This particular study has been my mainstay because, just as you said, this is a much wider base of data and information. And again, I would like for us to kind of start our own here with the participants and all of our other colleagues that we can get into this. I think it's great to read this, but I think we can kind of form a sister survey to this with our local people, because we all need to hear, I need to hear what you're faced with so I can be prepared for it, and maybe you can solve one of my problems. So this particular one, Nick, that's been my favorite.
Good. Yeah. All right. And then the third one, and we need to talk about this one. It's the Colorado State University research project that's going on. So Barry, you have some insight. You heard some more information about this study. Can you kind of share with us what they're doing out there in Colorado State?
Well, as I understand it, they, through NAM and some other big contributors, Nick, you know much more about that than I, they have talked a group of scientists and researchers into doing a survey for them. They put up $235,000, so this is a substantial move. And it's basically just an aerosol production study. And they're going to take each of the wind instruments. They're going to have a professional, play these instruments for 60 seconds, 1 minute, at all different ranges of the instrument and all dynamic ranges to kind of mimic how normal playing would go. They're going to scientifically determine the amount of aerosol that is put into the air because these instruments play. Right now, they're saying that the woodwind instruments are going to be the biggest culprit simply because the air comes out of them at an earlier stage of the instrument than they do on brass. And then they're going to work up some mathematical formula that we will sit down and put our numbers in. You know, if you have 20 trumpets, you multiply the trumpet number times 20. And then base that against, if you will, the HVAC system in your particular room or school, how often it is changing over the air. So this is, again, a very layered type of thing, but I agree with what you have put on here, that this one study, if it's turned out to be a valid study, which I really strongly believe it is going to be, it's going to determine a lot of what we do, where we do it, and how many people do it at a time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So a lot of people, both in the industry and from the education world, are funding this. Support from NAFME, from Bob Morrison and Arts Ed New Jersey, Ohio MEA, Texas MEA. A lot of NAM big organizations are supporting this. So I think it's great. It's going to provide us some data.
And you know, Nick, if I could get you,
Yeah.
you and I talked about this, and I see, again, my pessimistically optimistic nature. I see this as being a real problem, but you saw it differently by who is helping to fund this. If you would talk about that, I think that's very pertinent here.
Yeah. So, you know, my take on it, and look, this is my opinion. This is strictly my opinion, is that the people who are funding this, I don't think they're approaching this with, can we have music? I think they're approaching this with, how can we have music? I mean, I genuinely believe if this study was going to question the validity and the possibility of music, that MEAs and NAM and some of these organizations wouldn't do it. What I also found interesting is that the lady at Colorado State that they tapped to lead this study actually is somebody who measures and studies ways to minimize pollutants inside buildings. And so they're very obviously really trying to address this question, in my opinion, not can we have music, but how can we have music? And I'm very encouraged by that because I do think the study is going to provide the data that we need and the information that we need to proceed forward. Now, I do want to talk about this, and the dates I keep hearing is mid to late June. And I think it's great they're going to pull this study off in 30 days, but that's still 30 days out. And so I think we have to be careful, Barry. I mean, what are your thoughts? How do we address
at
this
least
study?
Late June, so it's actually been pushed back a little bit from the original reporting. You know, I'm two-faced about it. I would love for it to come back tomorrow because I'm really curious about the data and I like to see how that all plays out. But at the same time, Nick, I really think it's important that they, this time, get this right so that we can use it, as you said, to move forward. So, you know, to be honest with you, if it takes to the end of July, if it takes to the end of August, I would rather it come back as a useful tool for us. If we have to start our school year in a more separated and slighter numbers, and then we get to open back up fully because of this research, it promotes that. I think whatever time it takes is really, really good. I'd rather see it done as a promotional tool that we can utilize than to run in haste and throw out a bunch of data and then a corresponding scientific group come back and say, no, you didn't get it right.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, you know, I trust the people that are involved in this. I mean, they have the who's who within the industry and the education world really participating in this. So I think this is going to give us some great information. my thought though is I think, and Barry, you mentioned it earlier, let's go ahead and be proactive now. Let's let the Colorado State thing maybe pivot what we decide to do, but let's not wait to let it dictate and then we start that conversation. Because I think if we wait till mid-June, early July, it could be too late. The decisions could have been already made. So I think it's important that we keep this in the back of our mind, but that we not let it slow down our potential for progress at this particular time. Because if I've learned anything as a result of coronavirus and COVID-19 is it's okay to change your mind. I have noticed that a lot. It's okay. We're just learning. This is new to us. And so we see people pivoting and making changes. Even the CDC is doing it. So I think it's okay for us to say, this is the information that I have available at this time. So I'm going to plan on that. And if we have to pivot, that's okay too.
But Nick, we're talking to the people that's their lifestyle.
That's exactly right.
This group of people that is on tonight, we're the kings and the queens of taking a plan and then monitoring and adjusting it slightly. You were so spot on. We got this. And I'm so proud that all of these different entities are in this Colorado study. It goes back to what you said. We're on one team here, and we're going to get through this. This is all good. We're going to make it. It's going to be awkward. We're going to take baby steps, but we're going to get through it.
That's exactly right. So again, 3 great non-CDC resources that I would encourage everybody to keep up with, follow closely, because I think they've got some great information there as well. So that concludes tonight's topic, kind of the education side. So you might be wondering, what's next? What are the next steps that we're going to take? Now, next week, we're going to be congregating back together, and we're actually working on kind of a document that you can use. We've got kind of a collaborative group coming together, and you can start to put together your plan as it relates to your building. So we're going to start pulling together guidelines from the CDC and from NAM and all of these places that you can start to put together. You can copy and paste. You can remove the information that's not pertinent to you. And then that gives you a document that you can start to share with your parents, your administrators, your school board to say, I know this is all subject to change, but this is what I'm planning to do. This is how I'm planning to do it. And these are the CDC and the other guidelines that I'm referencing to get us there. We're going to write it in Google Docs, and that's very intentional, so that as this information changes, as studies come out, we can add to it. So this is not going to be next week we release this document, we walk away and we're done. We're going to keep working on this document all summer long, because I think as we get feedback from directors, from administrators, from other people, this will be a living, working document. So I hope you'll join us next week as we begin to introduce that, get some feedback from everyone, and figure out how we can make this as helpful as we possibly can. So on that note, I am going to go ahead and Barry, do you have any closing thoughts or anything?
Yeah, I'm gonna let my heart talk here. So if I say something wrong, I apologize. It's my heart, not my mind. But the decisions for your future are being made right now. But you also have to understand your principals and your superintendent's horrible place that they are to make these decisions. You need to get in contact with your principal daily. If nothing else, talk about the weather. Tell them how much you miss them. But you need to be talking to your principal. And in that rare moment or a few seconds that you do talk about whatever your concern is, you not only can say your problem, but you need to have a resolve. That principal needs to understand and trust you that you're a part of this. Our administrators are in an informational tornado right now, just as we are, maybe even worse, I'm not sure. But offer real results and show them that you are prepared. And I again want to remind you that students are attracted to BAM programs largely by the relationships they establish within them. The relationships they make with you, with each other, the community, and way beyond. In many cases, our band rooms are these children's entire universe. I would bet half of my students that is their universe. And if it's not their universe, Nick, it's their single safe place that they have, that they can be themselves and feel comfortable. And we need to make sure that we do everything as directors to not only meet this academic need of teaching them to play 12 scales and all of these other things that we feel so compelled to do, but right now our real challenge should be to identify the emotional needs of our children. Just always keep that in mind. You have to understand the why that they keep coming back to your class. And I just want to share that the technology tools are what they are, guys. We're not going to invent some new Zoom 2.0 or whatever, you know. So quit looking for something that's going to work and take the items that we have, these virtual electronic items, and master them to do what you need it to do. View the challenge from the point of an opportunist here. This is a great opportunity for you to really, really shine as the leader that I know you are in your program. But this is a chance for your community to step up and to recognize just how important you not only are to those kids, but to the entire school and very likely the community. Please stay focused on why these kids come to your class every day. And I'm just going to kind of use the other cliche that Nick did not use. Ben Franklin said that we must all hang together or we will most assuredly hang separately. And I think that is so true right now. Ladies and gentlemen, we can do this. We need to do it collaboratively, and we need to do it professionally. And I need your information. Again, you see my email address. Feel free to hit me. I'd love to hear what's working for you. If you just need to cuss and rant and rave, send me an email. I'll call you and we'll have a yell party or something. But let's do this together and let's take care of our kids. And I just want you all to know how much I appreciate you doing this noble thing that we are, which is to bring music to the lives of everybody in our community. Our kids are worth it. You're worth it. Thank you to Amro, thank you to Nick and CJ and Pat and the entire Amro family for putting these after hours things together. And I'm just honored that you let me gab a little bit with you, Nick.
Yeah, I've had fun tonight, man. I learned so much doing this. So again, Barry mentioned, here's our email addresses. You guys have been getting mine now for 6 weeks in a row, nick@amromusic.com. You've got Barry's down there. I'm going to be emailing this presentation out as soon as we're done, along with the continuing education certificate or the letter that your district might need. So if you're joining us from a Zoom ID, which means that you did not register, you just accessed the webinar using the Zoom ID. Just a reminder, I do not have your email and you'll want to email me. Everybody else, I've got your email from your registration link and I'll be able to email you with this PowerPoint and the PD letter as well. So on that note, that's all I have. Again, we're gonna see you next week for taking action, developing your action plan for music education. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. Have a safe evening and we'll see you next week.
Love you all. Everybody take care and be safe. Wash your hands.
That's right.
Are you tired now?